Welcome to What Do You Know Wednesday?
Well, we put each other on the spot so you don't have to.
One topic, one host who knows things.
And one host who knows some things. Okay, today, Jess, the question is, what do you know about Lydia von Finkelstein Mountford?
Well, besides the fact that her name is awesome, I don't know anything. I don't know who that is.
Well, let me illuminate you. She was not a Mormon, but she was a figure in Mormon history. And sometimes I read about a personal event, and then when I think about it later, I think, did I make that up? I think I must have imagined that altogether. And Lydia von Finkelstein Mountford falls into that category where I'm like, this sounds like too strange to be real, but I feel like I have read about this person. And indeed, I had. So Lydia von Finkelstein Mountford was a theatrical Holy Land lecturer who became a recurring figure in Wilford Woodruff's diary during the last year and a half of his life. She was also known as Madame Livia Mary Olive Mamriov von Finkelstein Mountford. She was Russian. She said she'd lived in Palestine and Jerusalem. She'd taught as a lecturer. She studied biblical customs, the New Testament, the life of Jesus. And then she would put on these theatrical presentations that used actors and costumes and these staged biblical scenes. There was an Australian reviewer in 1888 who wrote about one of her presentations, I guess you would call them, and described her as a 6-foot blonde of Amazonian proportions who would be the envy of any tragedy queen.
So that must be why she shows up in Wilford Woodruff's journal, huh?
You're not wrong. He was smitten with her. So she came to Salt Lake City in early 1897 when Wilford Woodruff was 90 years old and was president of the church. And after seeing one of her lectures, he wrote in his diary, I took my family to the theatre to listen to another lecture of Mrs. Lydia Mumford on Jerusalem. Her lectures are the most interesting of any I attended on the Holy Land and upon all that was spoken by the Saviour. Okay, so Lydia Mountford, she knew how to speak the language that Mormon leaders would pick up on. She was talking about Israel and Zion and covenant people and gathering and restoration. And so many of the people in Salt Lake City and the high apostles, they were lapping it up, especially Wilford Woodruff. His 90th birthday celebration at the Tabernacle was a presentation of hers. Mountford called herself the daughter of that Zion, and Utah was the Zion of the Western Hemisphere. And the Mormon settlement in Utah was like the children of Israel following Moses through the wilderness. She knew what they wanted to hear. So James E. Talmage heard her speak, and he was the one who made arrangements for her to lecture in the Tabernacle, which is where Wilford Woodruff was taking his family to see her. And then she also met with not just the first presidency and the Quorum of the 12, but there were other apostles who she was introduced to, one of whom, his name was Anton Lund. He was a Danish-born apostle who spoke 5 languages. And he was suspicious of her claims that she had connections to Jerusalem and Palestine, especially as he had just come back from a extended visit there or something. He said she didn't speak with the accents that he would expect. Anyway, he spoke 5 languages. For what it's worth, he thought she was kind of a charlatan.
I mean, I kind of think she was too.
Right, exactly. Yeah, he thought she was maybe a bit of a Marco Polo, like making up stories about places she hadn't really been. But Wilford Woodruff's diary shows that she established very quickly a central place in his life. On April 3rd, 1897, Woodruff wrote that, quote, Madame Mountford, having requested an interview, called at 10 p.m. and spent an hour very agreeably in conversation, close quote. He also wrote in his diary, I had a few minutes private talk with her and requested her to call again tomorrow afternoon. So she did become a frequent visitor. The next day, he was still talking about her in his diary. He was noting all of these like meetings and private conversations that he was having with her, and his diary just kept returning to her. The best is, not only did he write about her lectures, her visits, her correspondence and advice, but he talked about how beneficial her massage treatment was. He said he
No, wait. I'm sorry. The parallels, the massage. Who else do we know that is like very commonly brought up in current
oh, yeah,
discourse and the
and who's
news who is
obsessed with
getting
massage.
massaged?
Yeah, just absolutely obsessed with massage, exactly.
Wow.
Mhm. Yeah, just ask yourself, what kind of person? No, he called her M. That was his pet name for her. He said he had one of M's massage treatments. He was 90, by the way. Now, end of April, she leaves to go to California. She's going to go to San Francisco. And Wilford Woodruff, his secretary, his name was John Nuttall. And this is what Woodruff wrote. Brother Nuttall came. I had some talk on private matters with him, and in some writing I wish to send to San Francisco. This is what D. Michael Quinn, my favorite ever historian, pieced together. He argued that when Mountford went to San Francisco, we fully know that at the same time, Wilford Woodruff organized a trip to California that his wife and daughter wanted to go with him on, and he said no. He was going to go with John Nuttall, his secretary. Okay,
He's
only
90.
he's 90, exactly. So he says, look, all of this might be circumstantial evidence. We might not have a sealing record that proves this marriage, but what we do know, this is what D. Michael Quinn is saying, here's what we do know. He repeatedly references Mountford in his writings. He's has all these private meetings with her, has a pet name for her. He has these confidential conversations with John Nuttall, and then he arranges this quiet Pacific Coast trip in September while she's in San Francisco. Okay, so this California trip is the main evidence that Quinn has to suggest that they married and that she became one of his plural wives, because after Mountford went to California, as I said, Woodruff, he planned a trip with Nuttall. He wanted to keep it quiet completely, but he eventually had to tell his wife, Emma. She wanted to come, and it was Woodruff who refused, saying the trip was supposed to be a very quiet trip. They traveled under assumed names. They avoided public visits with Mormon officials and friends in California. Mountford was also in San Francisco during this period. And Quinn argued that what probably happened was that Woodford married Mountford as a plural wife aboard a ship off the Pacific coast, with Nuttall performing the ceremony on September 20th, 1897. Quinn pointed to the secrecy around the trip, the assumed names, the guarded diary language, and, most importantly, the broader pattern of post-Manifesto plural marriages that continued being performed in the church, outside public channels, and at sea. This was one of their workarounds. I mean, we know that the timing works. We know that Mountford was lecturing in San Francisco while Woodruff was traveling by boat, then at that point up to Portland. Mountford stayed connected with Woodruff after this trip. I should think so too. It sounds like they were married.
Yeah.
And then on January 11th, 1898, so a full year after they first met, Woodruff wrote, Madam Mountford called, and I talked with her in regard to Palestine and the mission of Elders Lund, who suspected her of being a charlatan, and Heinz to that land. She gave me some good ideas for our brethren to follow, which I had written down for future use and was pleased to receive them. No wonder the other general authorities didn't like her. They were like, we don't want this broad coming in here and giving you ideas. And then he ended the entry by saying that he bade her adieu on her mission and labors in the East. Now listen up. Whether or not they were married on that ship, she was posthumously sealed by proxy to Wilford Woodruff in the Salt Lake Temple in 1920, even though she hadn't been baptized during her
Yeah,
lifetime.
there's the smoking gun right
Okay.
there. Yeah.
Okay. So what we do is we look at those details as evidence, and then we use this thing that God gave us called a brain, and then these recording devices that we have called eyes. And yeah, then we can put two and two together and say, holy crap, Wilford Woodruff enamored by, and you know, what's his wife going to say? Don't take another wife? No, I mean,
Well, no, she doesn't get to say. I
she
mean,
didn't get to say
because
that.
she just gets overruled anyway. So
Yeah. And it sounds like in his 90th year, he was smitten. with Lydia von Finkelstein Mountford.
What was in it for her? That's what he was 90.
Probably a ton of influence. If
Yeah,
she
I
was
guess.
lecturing, it had to be economic
I would
gain.
think so? I'm not sure. I I am just gobsmacked.
Yeah,
I
I'm just gonna say, let's
dirty
just
old
like
man.
Joseph Smith didn't consummate his marriages, maybe this one wasn't consummated either.
That would
I
be
don't
a
know how I even
miracle.
came across her name, but it was just one of those things where it was like, who is this person? And what connection do they have to Mormonism? And Wilford Woodruff had what?
What a brilliant "What do you know Wednesday?" I knew nothing.
Well, that's all I have for today, but we will be back next week with another episode of What Do You Know Wednesday, and it's bound to be a scintillating topic because you're bringing it to us, Jess.
Oh,
If
not maybe as scintillating as this one,
the
but I'll
pressure's
do my
on,
best.
pressure is on. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your attention, for your likes, follows, subscribes, and shares. We so appreciate it.
We sure do. See you next week. And Hannah, before we sign off, as always, so sorry for what I said when I was Mormon.
And you better believe I am sorry for what I said when I was Mormon too.